Welcome back, everybody, to another Lady Leaders webinar. This is going to be kind of a short, tactical one, just with Ash and I. So I'm not going to do any introductions because hopefully after the years, you know who we are. But we're going to do, yeah, like I said, a short, tactical, hopefully around 30 minutes about raises. When, how, why, and I jokingly say like the panic that always sets in when doctors hear about this topic. And so, the first question that always comes to mind when I'm talking to doctors or really any team, any OMs, leaders, people like that, the first question I always have is, do you even currently have a system? If the answer is not really, I just kind of wait until they show up in my office or I hear the, hey, doctor, I'd like to talk to you comment. If that's your system, at least you can recognize that you don't have necessarily a real system. And it may be you do, some offices I know do reviews yearly, and the reviews are really just, I've heard things as simplistic as I just give $1 a raise every year, or, I kind of do a quick one-on-one with them once a year, and they know it's always going to be a certain dollar amount or what have you. But I think it's good to say, where are you starting from? And is it really working? And when I say, is it really working? I mean, does everybody involved feel good about how raises are received? Is there no sense of resentment on either side? It's like bonus systems. I always say, if they're not clear, simple, and everybody knows how to achieve it and what their part is, you probably should question if it's working. So that's always my first question is, do you have a system and is it working? And if the answer is no, no problem. Hopefully we can help with that today. Ashlee, what do you hear when you're talking to people about this subject?
No, I think you kind of hit it on the nose. It's when there's kind of there's a challenge to solve or problem to hone when you hear that like, hey, when are we going to talk about raises? Hey, can we do my annual review? And like your first instinct is like to get a tightness in your stomach and you're like, oh, I don't know, like like that I hear quite a bit. And man, time flies, it's like all of a sudden someone's been there, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And you want to, if you can lay this groundwork in the beginning, then it's gonna, like you said, kind of help in limiting resentments on both sides and keep your team cohesive.
Yeah, for sure. So I think we can both attest sometimes this isn't a real strong system for doctors. It's, as I joke, it was like hiring and onboarding. It's funny how important team is, but how little sometimes we can really think about the systems that include them in it. We can think about clinical stuff, we can think about inventory. I joke sometimes doctors will spend hours on inventory spreadsheets, but sometimes because HR related things can be a little bit more subjective or fuzzy, it feels like they'll put it off and then, they end up panicking. So, I ask doctors, okay, well, what's your reaction right now? And if it's panic, why? Why are we panicking? And usually when I dig into this, I find out that it comes from sometimes a doctor or OMs not necessarily knowing what the role of that person is. So for doctors, it's often front office or billing. They don't feel super confident. So when they ask for raises, they don't even know what to say. They just know they're always there. They always show up.
Yeah.
They think collections looks good. And if it's for, say, an OM, sometimes they don't always know the clinical side of it to know if they're doing a great job. So sometimes we don't really know what the person's doing. The other thing that I will say is it's often because we don't know our numbers very well. We don't know quite where our staffing costs are coming in. We don't quite know where the percentages are for hygiene versus front office and, versus DAs or associates. And we don't always know where we sit with that. So no matter what they say, it can either feel like a lot of money or we can be overly generous and not recognize sometimes how our cash flow is changed by not knowing that. So I think those are reasons. The other thing is sometimes panic sets in because I've been hearing more and more lately when I'm talking to doctors of team members, I think, capitalizing on the current market in certain areas and almost saying things like, well, I'm getting job recruitment from someplace else and they're going to give me, I'm making stuff up, obviously, they're giving me 27 and I'm currently here at 24. And so doctors just kind of get in this panic. And what I find is when they don't know their numbers, they don't know what the job is, and they hear things like that, they can end up either responding with anger or responding reflexively with, great, I'll just give it to you because I don't want to deal with this.
Yeah.
And either way just sets us up for things being sometimes messy or resentful, things like that. What have you heard when doctors just relent sometimes?
Um, yeah, I think the problem is it's your level of discomfort, right? Like and it's like back to that quote, your level of success is directly to the proportion of the number of uncomfortable
Uncomfortable.
conversations you're willing to have, and if it feels uncomfortable, sometimes it's just so much easier to just be like, no, it'll be fine. But sometimes, that's not necessarily good for the level of success, right? Because you need to have those uncomfortable conversations if maybe your numbers aren't where they need to be. However, though, too, I mean, one of the things we talk about is like, staffing costs is not where we should be cutting overhead. And that's not where you're like, well, we really need to crack down. Yes, we should cut bloat and, things should make sense. And, if an employee is toxic, absolutely don't keep them. But all these sidebars I'm on, but,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
yeah, um, sometimes it's just like it's because of the level of overwhelm just in general that's happening. It's easier just to give in, because they'd rather just not have that uncomfortable conversation, even if it's like, hey, really, if you're going to be happier there, then that might be the good move, the right move.
Right, right. Yeah. And like you said, when you feel that discomfort, I think rather than, you know, you have to take care of it in the moment. I get that, or you have to come up with a plan. But then, really, that's always my cue when I have those moments to say, I've got to come up with something long term.
Mhm.
So, what I will say is, if that is you, then let's discuss, I think, for the little bit of time here that we have, of how do we alleviate that panic? What does it take to alleviate it? And I think, Ashlee started hitting on the very first point, which is you got to know your numbers. And we've had Jake Conway on here. There's lots of resources within DSN to figure out, how do I need to know my numbers? Yes, production, net production, yes, collections, but what is all the categorization
Mhm.
within your P&L look like for, yes, staffing of every different department, but just like you said, Ashlee, what about, variable costs versus fixed costs? And to your point, like, we've really got to be careful about always cutting down variable costs first. And I tell doctors, really, I think the panic can set in the most when we don't know our numbers and we're not certain, and maybe this is just me, but we're not certain we were a good steward of those variable costs. So sometimes when I had to look in the mirror, and this was, previously to DSI and all of that, I had to be honest, I didn't know. So I would get kind of frustrated and panicky, but I also didn't necessarily know to a detail where all my costs really were. Was I spending too much on supplies? Was I spending too much on shipping or variable costs that were potentially negotiable? If that's the case and that's you, you know what? I am there with you. I was once that person too. It's really easy to find ways to know your numbers. It's not scary. And I always say, reach out to me. I will be happy to tell people how to go through those kind of things because, like I said, we have resources within DSN, Jake Conway, things like that, where you can get reports that will tell you these things. So number one is know the numbers. And my feeling is if your team has at least a baseline understanding of what their part of controlling variable overhead is, meaning, not staying clocked in. People call it milking the clock, but actually just being clocked in responsibly, knowing supplies and overhead that they can have direct control over, that links beautifully to pay raises. So I say overhead is for the doctor to control, but the team to know what part they play in it. So that's first and foremost. And then second, reestablishing, and it's never too late. I was in practice, I think 10 years before I ever did any of these sort of things. So if you're that person who's like, gosh, it's been a mess for a while, what do I do? I'm like, don't worry, it's never too late.
Never too late.
You can always, I don't care how old you are, to learn your numbers and then reset the baseline for how raises are earned. And, I think it's so important that raises really, and I learned this from Alistair so long ago, it's really a way that a team member is wanting to bring more value to that business, and so raises equal the value brought by that person. And the minute we can kind of rewire everything in our practice to think more like that, the better. Because I said somehow dentistry became this weird niche business that we started doing reviews once a year. And the thing that I laughed at that I used to do is I was that person who would sometimes just give people $1 more per hour. So what's funny is I was talking to somebody who worked in government, and he was saying, that's such a weird concept because, he was the one who was like, that doesn't actually make any sense at all. Because what $1 is to one person could be absolutely something different to somebody else.
Yeah.
And he was so right. So the minute I switched it to raises come with value brought, and they also come at a percentage. So now it's a 3 to 7% raise based on the value brought. And it's a sliding scale that goes from 3% up to 7% based on going above and beyond or maintaining and just maintaining the standards and nothing more. So I've redone, like I said, 10 years ago, really, how do we think about it? And, gosh, I can't remember, a couple of years ago, my buddy Amit, who I don't know where he is anymore with dentistry, but he came up with the very first tier system with Jay Conway that was for dental assistants. And this tier system was the way that DAs, specifically for him, could learn how do they bring more value to their position, consistently. So he kind of just wrote out, okay, what's a baseline tier 1 DA look like? Okay, it looks like they can do all of these baseline standards. Now a tier 2 DA, they can do all of that plus all of these things. And in every office, it's going to look a little different. I warn people. For some people, they're going to use iteros and mills and ortho and endo type procedures, big things. And that can grow as they move through the tiers. So every tier is going to have, for us, tier 1 in all our positions, baseline standard of this is what has to be completed to be considered, holding up the standards of our practice in that department. Tier 2, 3, 4, and beyond can just expand upon that. Yeah. And what I found is he created, that DA one, and then I don't know what it was now, 5 or 6 years ago, I created all the other positions to where in my office, every position had tiers made up. And you have to reanalyze it because things change in practices. But what I found is with that tier system and every position having the presentation of this is what the baseline standards look like. If I want to grow, here's exactly the areas I can grow in. They get it checked off by their superior or the dentist, whoever that person may be, whether it was me, an associate doctor, one of the leads in the department, whoever it needs to be. They check off that, yes, they're doing this consistently. And I found that anything less than 4 months is usually not going to work for us. It needs to stay consistent, at least 4 months, that new skill set. But for us, it's 6 months. And what was neat is as we built these tiers for every, position, we made sure that everybody understood them. There was complete transparency of how everybody grew. And for me, it made it to where when people would want to come and have a conversation in regards to getting a raise, well, first I understood where my numbers were. I knew where overhead was. I knew where staffing was. And then second, they literally could come in with this ready to go. Look at this, doctor. This is everything that I've accomplished. I got it checked off by, Brittany, the lead DA, and both associate doctors or all associate doctors. I'm able to do it consistently. It made it to where it was fun to get those kind of, to have those conversations happen versus that dreaded panic because I don't quite know where they're at. So that's what I would say for us, the changes were knowing my numbers and starting to create a growth ladder. I tell people, call it whatever you want, but the growth ladders have been more successful for us than anything else. Um, we make sure that conversations can happen with every single team member by their leader once every 3 months. And the leader will ask, hey, she does a check in with them, and she'll say, tell me where you're at on your growth ladder. What tier are you in? What are you working on? Where do you need to be supported? Where are you held up? Because we've had a couple DAs where, like, to be honest, we're waiting on one doctor to check these off. But it makes it so much of a better conversation where she can see exactly the skill set. Now, I will say the skill set has to grow while the culture remains high. So they know
Mm-hmm.
our core values. So they get to see the core values have to stay at a 4+ on a scale of 1 to 5. And then skill set can grow within that tier. Now, each of our tiers has, like, if you take a DA, you have tier 1 standard. Here's all the, tier 1 standards. There's probably per tier anywhere between 12 and 25 different things. It's going to be different for every office as to what, people do in their departments. But every tier has somewhere between 12 and 25 things that can get checked off. And what's nice is when, say, a DA comes to my lead, Brittany, who some people know, they get to look at her and say, hey, I've made it about halfway through. Here's all the things in tier 2 that I've gone through. I've gotten checked off, and I've been consistent with it for 6 months. You don't have to wait until the entire tier is over, or completed before you actually analyze for raises. But remember, the value brought by that position should help compensate for the raise that's going to be given. So if DAs are doing more skill sets that free up a doctor so the doctor can be more productive, then it makes sense. They're bringing the value to be able to almost earn their own raise. Same with front office, TCs, scheduling coordinators. Every tier as they grow in skill set, or they can ultimately end up just solving more problems. Because I do tell people sometimes as you get, I have leaders who've been with me for 10, 15 years, past level tier 4 or 5, you get to the point where how many more skills can they
Right.
gain? You do start to run out a little bit of some of those.
Sure.
They start to actually put more problems that they can solve on their plate from myself, or they can actually take and absorb those. Brittany just did it today, as a matter of fact. She just texted me and said, hey, I'm going to take this one on. And she said, so from here on out, I know who to contact. I know what to do. I just want to let you know I put that on my plate. For me, growing in skill set is incredibly important, but as they become leaders, solving more problems is everything that I would want. And that frees me up, which for me, time is money. And so, what I can tell doctors, if you're looking for a system, you feel the panic, first know your numbers. Second, think about creating tiers. And people are always, a little bit like, I don't know how, I don't understand. And I say, I promise you, it's not as hard as people think. If I can do it, everybody can do it. And that's where, open your Google Sheet or Excel, whichever one you like better. Literally, what would be for you tier 1 of that department? And you might need help from some of your teams. What is the baseline standard? And that's tier number 1. And then just start building from there. What does growth look like? And for every tier, you're going to have a dollar amount range that you would say, if it's a beginning DA, maybe you're beginning, I have no idea, everybody, so don't email me with whatever I'm saying dollar amount wise. But let's pretend your baseline DA is anywhere between 20 and 25. Tier 2 might be anywhere between 25 and 29, and go up from there. But then that allows you to have that sliding scale within the tier. And you can give anywhere between 3 and 7% based on how well they're doing, how much they're growing. Like I said, consistency has to be there along with the culture. And that's where you get the feedback of your leaders, the people who are overseeing them, or if it's you obviously, as the owner doctor, if your office is small enough. Because like I said, then when you have these conversations, we make sure that there's time built in for these conversations. They know every 3 months their leader's going to check on them. Where are you at with your tiers? How are things going? Do you need support? Are you waiting on anything? So they know when the conversations are going to be happening from their leaders. I know then when I'm getting the information, I'm prepared for it. Okay, I know exactly where this person grew. I know that their leader says that they are awesome in core value and they grew in these skill sets and they're actually utilizing them consistently. Great. I'm ready then when they come in to have these conversations, and I genuinely am jazzed. Like I said, the other part of doing this is I love, 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 love having transparency in my office. It
Yes.
feels so good that I don't have to worry about front office A talking to front office B and being like, wait, why are you getting paid 25 and I'm getting paid 24? Because I always assume, and I joke with doctors, I'm going to just assume those conversations will happen. And I want to be able to say, no problem, I can show you exactly why. This is
Yeah.
exactly why. And that just feels better for me. So I'm going to stop there and check in. Check check me, Ashlee, where did I not make sense?
Okay, no, I'm loving, there's so many things I want to highlight in what you're saying. It all makes sense. What I loved and want to highlight is that your tiers are based on value. And because like you said, so many people are like, well, I don't know where to start. Where do I even start with these tiers? How do I even get started? Like just going back to simply skills and value and skills in the beginning, and then the problem solving. Like when you said that, my heart just like I took a deep breath for you, that she took that off your plate because that is so valuable is when they're like, no, or when they're like, oh, by the way, I just handled this. That's my favorite too. And I'm like, yes, you did.
Yeah.
That's, I didn't even know there was a problem, that's
Yeah.
absolute favorite. Um, and then the other thing I really like too that you mentioned is that, there's the sliding scale within the tier. So it's not necessarily like you have to do all of these things before you get any raise at all. Like it gives you wiggle room in there and makes it super easy. And then finally, yeah, that transparency, like just being able, like you said, the conversations are going to happen, whether they tell you they are happening or not, they are happening. I
Mhm,
can guarantee you they're happening. So
mhm.
it's just so nice to just be able to be fully transparent in yeah with everyone in your office. You know exactly why they're in certain places. So yeah, I
Yep.
just wanted to reiterate those things. You're right too. Some people are like, oh no, where do I start? It's too much. Listen to ChatGPT and Gemini. Like we have AI now. Like just start to get ideas. I'm
Yep.
not saying it's like the best thing in the world, but it's a good place to start so that you aren't having to start totally from scratch because sometimes that can feel very intimidating and overwhelming. It's like to sit down on the blank sheet and be like, I have 10 different positions to make tiers for. You know what I mean? So use
Mhm.
your AI friends.
Absolutely. Well, and that's where sometimes, for doctors, if you happen to have that front office person who is, I always say, getting the results you would want somebody else to get,
Yeah.
then then potentially get their help for a special project like this.
Yeah.
But where we can sometimes go wrong is we delegate out way too much way too quick, and then we're not, those standards aren't really ours, those tiers aren't really ours. So I tell doctors, I'll always start with the easiest one, which for most doctors it's usually DAs and hygienists. And I say, like, let's just baseline what you want
Mhm.
standard wise. For hygienists, IO photos, perio chart, FMX, whatever that is, put that in for your tier one. What are your non-negotiable baseline standards for your optimal care that they can't go below? And that's that tier one.
Mhm.
Then just build up from there. They can
Mhm.
start to talk about bigger cases. They can scan for retainers. What in your mind would be just a step above that that would be even better? And start, like you said, just throw it into Chat GPT, and it can actually, I've done so many things through AI,
Oh
and
yeah.
it gives you such a good starting point. It may not be everything, but it gives you a great starting point. So that's why I tell doctors, start with the positions you know the best.
Yes.
And I promise, if you just take any type of focus time and just start, the rest starts to fill in. And I always
Agree.
joke, like, I'm not magical. I promise. I just sat down and made myself do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, once you get those, you'll start to be able to, it flows really comfortably. And then you can give it to, say, a hygienist that's been with you for a while, or a DA. Your front office can give it to other front office, because you will forget things potentially. And it doesn't have to be every little thing. It can be more of like a topic, able to fill the schedule to production, 90% of the time, whatever it may be,
Mhm.
able to hit KPIs 90% of the time. It doesn't have to be absolutely exhaustive.
Mhm.
Uh, this tier sheet is not, like I said, an onboarding packet. It's not that detailed. It's just, like I said, 12 to 25 things per tier that as they grow in the company in 1, 3, 5 years, they have a place to grow and go, and they know explicitly where they can provide more value. Like I said, it brings transparency. The other thing is that I've heard other offices worry that team members have said it looks like you show favoritism to DA1 because she's been here longer. This gets rid of favoritism. It levels the playing field for all. And the only part that can get subjective is the core values, which it's always going to be slightly subjective. So, when it comes to skill set, it's very black and white. Everybody can grow. Core value wise is where you have to bring in, are they assessing themselves at the same level that you're assessing them with the core values? And then, like I said, it just gives even leaders a place to grow, and they have to stay consistent. For me, I'm never going to promote a leader who isn't at that highest level of tier, meaning, yes, they know the skill set and are great at it. Part of our tier fours are they can teach other people in their departments. They can teach them, and that person will get the same results as that teacher. That's part of our tier four. So I'm not going to promote a leader who can't do that.
Oh, the other thing I really love that you said too is like they have to be there for at least 6 months and do this consistently, because I could absolutely see it being like, no, I just hit it. Look, I just did these things. And you're like, no, like we know it has to be consistent. I think that's a really big, it's a really simple thing, but it's two different sides of the spectrum. The doc is thinking one thing, the employee is thinking another thing. So I think that that's just like a really simple clarifying as you're rolling out tiers, like you have to be at least 6 months at this before you're here. So I love
Yep.
that.
Yep. Well, because otherwise too, like we want people who want to grow quick. We want them to have the ladder to grow quick, but within reason.
Yes.
Sometimes we've had those team members they are so eager to grow that we found, like I said, if we went much below 6 months, once in a blue moon, 4 months, we could go down and they could, the new skill set could stick. What we found is they almost grew too quickly and they would lose some of the fundamentals.
Yep.
And so, like I said, that tier one can start to get a little bit messier, we joke. So we tell them this is for the good of them and, for everybody involved. But then also we don't really have to worry about, I joke, bad timing because the timing is set. We also don't have to worry about social proof from other people. We've got a system. We know how they grow. If they tell us they're going to get paid $1 bazillion somewhere else for something else, we say, great, you must be providing a whole bunch more there than you are here. I'm taking it. And that's where sometimes we can just have that better conversation. The other thing that, like I said, I did learn from Alistair is, well, why do you think they're needing to pay that? Why are they needing to pay that much? That's strange,
What a good question.
because it's a great comeback. Why do you think they have to do that? Because they're compensating for culture, they're compensating for high turnover, they're compensating potentially for something. And so I think knowing my numbers and building these tiers has given me just such a better sense of having really good, honest conversations. And I tell people, reach out, message me on DSN if you need, but I've had a lot of these conversations with doctors where when you have this, you just feel better about having the conversations. You don't feel reactive, you feel neutral, which is just such a better place, I think, to respond. How this can go wrong, I tell people, is sometimes doctors want to take what they heard from somebody else and just use other people's stuff and just kind of quickly throw it out to the team. Here's these tiers, it's going to be great, it's how you grow. Talk to your leaders about it. And then there's a little bit of a mutiny, and team members start to be like, what does this mean? Like, this is so confusing. Am I just a number? All I am is numbers. And that's how team can feel. And so I tell people it's really important how you present it, and then it needs to come from you as the owner doctor, really understanding the why behind it. It should feel clear, simple, and exciting to team members, not burdensome and a nuisance. Now, if you did present it well, you met with the whole team and then potentially with each department, you may have team members that don't want to have to potentially grow in skill set to get money. That's a whole different conversation. If they got very used to, tenure being how they grew in income, I joke, then that is better for the government. Or being a professor at a college. tenure just equals potential raise and you don't have to worry about growing. That's not the same in small business and, in dental offices. So that's a different conversation. So the presentation has to be done by you with enough time to explain it globally, and then enough time to explain it per department. The other thing, like I said, is I've seen it go wrong where we're not consistent with it and we're not consistent with the making sure they're doing it for at least 4 months, if not 6 months. People sometimes don't update the tiers with maybe new technology, what's happening compensation wise in the area, because you don't have to put a dollar amount above the tiers. A long time ago, I did that where I put the range. I just took that out because things are changing so fast
Yeah.
that now they just know what the tier means and then they know about where they're going to be sliding up between 3 and 7%. I think, I've seen it go wrong when leaders don't maintain the tiers, meaning they themselves potentially aren't always at level 4 or 5, whatever your highest tier is. That's just not a good look for the people underneath. I think docs just not being able to have good, healthy conversations around the tiers, or being inflexible. Like I said, I like this being you can grow within that tier and still get a raise. You don't have to do the whole tier to get the raise. I think being maybe inflexible about things can lead to frustration, I've seen as well. So I think I tell doctors before you unveil it, make sure you've taken the time to create the tiers. And then I always say, review it with your most trusted, most tenured, and then ideally high accountable team members. I say never review things like this with low accountable team members because there's no point. It's kind of how I feel about 360 feedback, actually. So in my mind, I'm like, go over, like, I know I have my people that are always going to see things incredibly pragmatic, neutral from both sides. The health of the business, the health of the team, and really the health of everyone, the patient included. And so they're going to look at it like that. Make certain before you go and do this in front of the whole team, you've got your ducks in a row, you've had the conversations, and you can present it in a way that's going to come across how you want.
Yeah.
So that, like I said, it's simple, it's clear, and it can make people excited about what it looks like. I think that for me would be where I would say if you don't have a system currently, it's time to rethink having a system. First thing is knowing your numbers. Whatever it takes, there's lots of resources on DSN to know your numbers. Practice by numbers. Like I said, Jake Conway, there's so many things. Divergent, there's so many systems out there to help know your numbers. But know your categorization, P&Ls, variable, overhead. And it's our responsibility to control that as much as possible so that we have the room to pay our staff as much as possible and incorporate things like the tiers. And then the second thing is maybe just a thought is, do people have a way to grow within the organization and they know how they can increase in value? That's really all this is. Do they see it in black and white? They know what the baseline standards are and how do they grow up from there within their position? Do they see a path forward of growth? And that we call them the tiers per position. So I would say that for me has been the most successful way to not have that pit in my stomach and the panic. But anything else, Ash, that you want to include as we kind of wrap up to make sure that too, it's just clear for everybody.
No, I think that was a really, really good foundation. I mean, obviously everything is customizable per your situation and your culture and that type of thing. So, but I think this really lays a good foundation for getting this started, for eliminating, like you said, that pit in your stomach. At least you have a system, at least it's clear. It's a relatively simple way to at least get everyone on the same page without having like silence just builds resentments and ignoring it. So like just laying it out there helps so much. People appreciate knowing what their path forward is and what the goals are. So
A
yeah, I love
million times over. I love that you even said that because I always say, like, I never trust silence.
it. Mm-hmm.
I'm always going to say, I'm just going to say something, to ensure that people do know. And maybe they were thinking all along there was a path for growth, but I'm going to ensure that it's completely explicit because I agree with you. If people don't think there's a path for growth, I've been shocked at how many people start looking for jobs because they think there aren't.
Right.
any places to grow. So
Right.
that's where I'm like, make it explicit. Maybe they already know, but if
Yeah.
you can make it explicit, it just makes things so transparent and nice,
Yeah.
for your team, for you. And like I said, I want to make races happy and exciting, not panicky. And I don't want them to feel sick coming to me. I want them to feel proud.
Yeah.
Because like I said, when they feel proud about their skill set and they grow in confidence, it's better for everybody regardless. So hopefully that's helpful. I am really grateful to everybody who did. I threw out in the lady leaders little room, if there's some topics people want to talk about. And thank you for everybody who answered, super helpful. We plan on, trying to ensure that we bring value ourselves every time we are on these webinars. So thank you for the feedback as well. Thank you, Ashlee, I'm grateful that you were so flexible with moving stuff around.
No
I
worries.
moved everybody. I'm moving my daughter to college this last weekend, and I kept planning stuff while I was gone. And Ashley's like, "Aren't you moving your own child to college?"
I was like,
I'm
I
like,
don't think you're free then.
"No." I'm like, "Ashley, I'm not. See, I need you for that." Oh, goodness.
Hey, that's why we're a good duo. Thank you so much,
Yeah, yeah.
Dr.
Thank
Kassmel.
you.
We appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, and we'll see you guys back in October for the next Lady Leaders webinar.
Right, bye.
Bye.